The twin suns of Vorin hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the jagged, metallic landscape of the city. Its towers reached high, spiraling toward the clouds like the claws of some giant beast. Lyra Vensar walked along the narrow streets, her boots clanging softly against the metal walkways. The air smelled faintly of ozone and heated alloy, a reminder that this was a city built not only for living, but for controlling everything beneath its watchful gaze. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd, but no one dared meet hers directly. Whispers moved faster than feet here, and in those whispers, names carried power and fear. Lyra had heard the rumors for months, the name never spoken aloud except in hushed tones behind closed doors. Every time she heard it, her chest tightened and her mind filled with uneasy anticipation. There was a force coming, something, or someone, who was unlike anything Vorin had ever known. Whispers floated across the city like a storm in the air, saying, "He comes." They whisper his name in fear. She had been trained to distrust the unknown. She had been trained to follow protocol. And yet, as she navigated the winding streets of the upper district, she felt a pull she could not explain, a sense of curiosity and dread intertwined. The disappearances had started subtly, elite officials vanishing, entire squads of enforcement officers gone, leaving nothing but chaos in their wake. The official reports were vague. An unknown variable, they said. But every Vorinian who had seen the one responsible had reacted in the same way: fear, sudden flight, or outright collapse. Lyra was not like other Vorinians. She had studied anomalies and unpredictable events for most of her life. She knew fear when she saw it, but she also knew that fear could be misleading. She had to see it for herself, whatever it was. Her destination was the quarantined sector near the western cliffs, a place few dared enter. Officially, it was off-limits due to a containment failure months ago. Unofficially, it had become a magnet for stories, rumors, and dangerous secrets. Lyra slipped through the security gates with forged clearance codes, her pulse steady despite the tension in the air. The streets here were quiet, almost eerily so, and the occasional hum of machinery echoed against empty buildings. Shadows moved at the edges of her vision, but when she turned, no one was there. And then she saw him. He was standing at the edge of a courtyard, framed by the jagged steel and concrete of a ruined observation tower. Lyra froze. He was human, not a Vorinian, not one of the minor species that had come to the planet over the last few decades. A human. The stories were true. But more than that, he carried himself with a confidence that unsettled her. Not arrogance, not aggression. Confidence. He stood straight, shoulders back, hands relaxed, as if he belonged here, even though she knew he did not. The humans were supposed to be weak. Their bodies fragile, their technology crude in comparison to Vorinian mastery, and yet here he was, and the whispers she had only heard from others now filled her mind directly, as if some psychic echo had found her. They fear him. He is coming. They cannot stop him. Lyra's instincts screamed caution. Her training told her to retreat, to report the anomaly and let the authorities handle it. But something in her chest urged her forward. Curiosity, yes, but also recognition. She could not explain it. It was as if a piece of herself, buried under years of discipline and protocol, had suddenly awakened. The human turned his head slightly, catching her gaze. Their eyes met, and for the briefest moment, Lyra saw something in him that went beyond confidence. There was intelligence there, yes, but also awareness. Awareness of everything around him, yet not a trace of fear. He smiled faintly, a small, human smile, and then looked away, scanning the ruined buildings with careful precision. Lyra stepped closer, keeping to the shadows. She noticed details that should not have mattered, but did. The way he observed the machinery, the way he calculated distances between structures, the way he moved without hesitation. Every motion seemed deliberate yet effortless. She could not take her eyes off him. A sudden sound made her flinch. A shadow detached itself from the corner of a building, a Vorinian patrol. They moved swiftly, but the human did not react in panic. Instead, he reached into a small pack at his side, pulling out a device that emitted a soft, bright pulse. The patrol froze mid-step, confused, then retreated. Lyra's heart raced. This was impossible. Human technology should not have been capable of such precision, of such control over Vorinian systems. And yet he did it as if it were natural, as if it had always been part of him. She watched, fascinated, as he continued to explore the ruined sector, moving from shadow to shadow, examining abandoned equipment. occasionally touching consoles and reading displays with a skill that made her breath catch. Every move was intentional, every gesture full of purpose, and the whispers in her mind grew louder. He is here. He cannot be stopped. He changes everything. Lyra had to know. She stepped into the open, letting her presence be seen. The human looked at her again, this time with direct attention. "You're Vorinian," he said, his voice calm but carrying authority. "I don't mean harm, I just need to understand this place." She froze at the sound of his words. His accent was strange, but there was no fear, no hesitation, only clarity. Something in her chest shifted. She realized that this was not a threat, at least not in the way she had imagined, and yet she could not shake the sense of danger. Something about him made even trained Vorinians whisper in fear. "Who are you?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. The human tilted his head slightly. "I am someone who has learned to survive, someone who adapts, and right now I need to know what happened here." Lyra studied him carefully. He spoke plainly, but every word carried weight. The calm certainty, the patience, the intelligence, it was unlike anything she had seen in other humans. She had encountered humans before, but they were always small, reactive, unpredictable in ways that made them weak. This one, he was different. She took a careful step closer. "You don't belong here," she said. "You shouldn't be able to move freely in this sector." "It's dangerous," he shrugged, a human gesture that seemed almost casual. "Danger is everywhere. I've learned that it's better to understand it than fear it." Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. She had never heard anyone speak like that, not even the highest-ranking Vorinians. There was a depth to his words, a quiet power that defied the rigid rules of her society. "Why are you here?" she pressed. He glanced at the ruined buildings, at the twisted metal and broken machinery, then back at her. "I'm looking for answers. Something happened here that I need to understand, and from what I can tell, everyone else is too afraid to face it." Lyra's mind raced. The whispers, the rumors, the fear, it all made sense now. He was not just a human, he was something more. Something that challenged everything the Vorinians believed about themselves, about their control, about their power. A sudden noise drew their attention. From the shadows, more patrols approached, moving with silent precision. Lyra's training kicked in. "Go," she said quickly. "You can't fight them all," he shook his head. "I don't need to fight them, I need to show them they're not invincible." Lyra blinked. She had never heard such confidence, not even from the most decorated warriors of Vorin. And yet she realized that this human did not just stand before her. He stood for something more, an idea, a challenge, a possibility. The patrols slowed as he moved forward, hands raised slightly but not in surrender. His movements were deliberate, calm, measured. And then, with a soft pulse from a device she hadn't even noticed him carrying, the patrols stopped entirely. Confusion and hesitation rippled through their ranks. Lyra watched, stunned. Human ingenuity, human adaptability, human courage, here it was, displayed in ways that the Vorinians had not thought possible. When the patrols finally retreated, the human turned to her. "See, they fear me not because I am strong, but because I do not act like them. I do not play by their rules, and that makes them uncertain, and uncertainty is dangerous for those who crave control." Lyra felt a rush of something she could not name: admiration, fear, awe. The human's presence was a puzzle she could not solve, yet one she could not look away from. He carried a quiet power, not of force, but of principle, of thought, of adaptability. You are different," she said finally, almost a whisper. He smiled faintly. "Yes. And that difference, it matters." Lyra realized then that the whispers were true in their own way. Vorinians did not fear him because of what he could destroy. They feared him because of what he represented: change, unpredictability, freedom. And in that moment, standing in the ruined courtyard, she understood something profound. She was witnessing the arrival of a force that could alter the course of their entire civilization. She stepped closer, her instincts torn between caution and fascination. "I need to understand you," she said. "I need to know why you are here." He looked at her, eyes steady, unwavering. "Then watch, learn, and maybe one day you'll see the truth of what humanity can do." The twin suns dipped lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Lyra felt a strange mix of dread and excitement. The human stood there, calm, resolute, unyielding. And in that calm, she sensed the whispers changing, not just fear, but anticipation, possibility. She did not yet know what this human would do. She did not yet know the full measure of his abilities, his mind, his courage. But she knew one thing for certain: the stories, the whispers, the fear, they were only the beginning. And as she watched him move through the ruins, studying, adapting, surviving, Lyra realized something that both terrified and thrilled her. The human stood before her, and he was unlike anyone they had ever seen. The wind across the western cliffs carried a sharp, metallic tang, and Lyra Vensar could feel it biting at her skin as she followed the human deeper into the abandoned sector. His movements were effortless, each step measured and precise, yet he never rushed. He seemed to understand the terrain better than anyone had a right to, navigating broken walkways and fallen machinery as though he belonged there. Lyra's mind raced with questions, each one louder than the last. How could a human move like this? How could he survive where trained Vorinians faltered? The human glanced back at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Stay close. The structures here are unstable, but they also tell a story if you know how to read them. Lyra frowned. She had spent her life interpreting Vorinian history and engineering, but his words carried a new meaning. She realized she was not just watching him. She was learning, almost unconsciously, from the way he analyzed the environment. There was no panic in his eyes, no hint of fear for the crumbling buildings or the deep drops between platforms. He was observing, calculating, and preparing. As they moved further, the whispering in her mind grew stronger. The stories she had heard in corridors, the rumors among the elite, were no longer distant echoes. They were immediate, pressing, alive. He is here. They cannot control him. He changes everything. Lyra tried to push them aside, tried to focus on the mission and the rules she had always followed, but the pull of curiosity, the need to understand, was overwhelming. They reached a large chamber. Its ceiling collapsed in jagged shards, beams hanging like the ribs of some massive beast. In the center, a console flickered faintly, wires sparking as if begging for repair. The human knelt beside it, examining the device with a casual intensity that made Lyra's pulse quicken. This was designed to regulate the sector, he said, running his fingers over the controls. But it hasn't worked in months. I can fix it. Lyra blinked. Fix it? You? How? He smiled again, not arrogantly, but as if the answer were obvious. I've learned to adapt. You don't always need power, you just need understanding. Lyra watched as he manipulated the console, pressing buttons, adjusting wires and testing systems with tools that looked rudimentary but worked with precision beyond anything she had seen. The lights flickered, then steadied. A hum filled the room, the machinery coming to life. The whispers in her mind shifted slightly, a subtle change that made her shiver. He brings order where chaos rules. He is unpredictable. He is human. Before she could respond, a sudden clatter echoed from the upper levels. Shadows moved swiftly across the beams. Vorinian patrols, they had discovered their intrusion. Lyra's heart raced. The human, however, did not flinch. He glanced at her once and then rose, calm and deliberate. Follow me, he said, moving toward a narrow passage she had not noticed. The patrols entered the chamber, their eyes widening as they saw the human. He stood tall, unarmed, yet they hesitated. Even trained soldiers could not ignore the presence he carried. The air seemed to shift around him, a quiet tension that unsettled even the bravest. Lyra realized the whispers were not exaggeration. This human's presence alone was enough to disrupt fear, control, and hierarchy. He raised his hand slowly, showing no aggression. You don't have to fight me, he said. I'm not your enemy. The patrol captain, a massive Vorinian with 4 arms and psychic sensors, scowled. You are in violation of every regulation. Surrender now, human. The human's eyes were steady, unflinching. I don't surrender to fear or rules that don't make sense. I act when it matters. The captain hesitated, scanning the human's face, feeling the subtle confidence radiating from him. It was unlike anything the Vorinians had experienced. Fear and uncertainty flickered in the captain's mind. The whispers returned, echoing with urgency. They fear him. Even the strongest cannot ignore him. Lyra's chest tightened. She had seen fear before, but never like this. It was not mere instinct. It was a deep, primal recognition that control had been broken. And yet, even as the patrols faltered, she knew this was only the beginning. The human stepped closer to the console, not threatening, not aggressive, just calm. If you truly want to serve Vorin, he said, his voice steady, then see what is here. Learn, don't destroy. Understand before you judge. The patrol captain's psychic sensors flickered, confusion and doubt spreading through his mind. One by one, the other patrol members lowered their weapons, unsure of what to do. The human's calm, his adaptability, his refusal to fight, they had no precedent for this. It was not weakness, nor was it strength as the Vorinians defined it. It was something entirely new. Lyra stepped closer, her curiosity overriding protocol. How are you doing this?" she asked quietly. The human glanced at her, a faint smile playing across his face. "Because I don't fear the unknown, I adapt, I think, I observe, and I act when it matters most." Lyra felt a mix of admiration and unease. Everything she had learned about humans, their fragility, their unpredictability, was being challenged in front of her. This one human carried a presence, a force that shifted the rules of the world. She realized she was witnessing more than survival. She was witnessing a new kind of power. After several tense moments, the patrols retreated, mumbling orders to report the incident. Lyra could see the confusion etched on their faces. She knew that reports of this encounter would spread rapidly, and with them more whispers of fear. The human turned to her. "They won't forget this," he said simply. "No," Lyra agreed, "but neither will I." They moved further into the sector, and he began to explain what he had observed. He spoke of systems failing, of chaos that had been left unchecked, and of the potential for control if someone knew how to read the patterns. Lyra listened intently, absorbing every word. She realized that what the human described was not just survival, it was understanding. He saw the world not as a set of obstacles, but as a network of possibilities. As they reached a central hub, a massive dome that had once monitored the entire sector, the human paused. "This place," he said, running his hand across the control panel, "it tells a story of neglect and fear, but it also holds potential that no one here dares to see because they are trapped by their rules." Lyra studied the dome, her mind racing. She had been trained to maintain order, to enforce hierarchy, to follow regulations. But here was someone who ignored all of that, not out of disrespect, but because he understood something she could not yet put into words. "What happens next?" she asked. The human looked at her, eyes steady, unwavering. "Next we learn, we understand, and maybe, just maybe, we change the way things are done here." Lyra nodded slowly, a mixture of fear and anticipation swirling within her. She had no idea what he was capable of, no idea how far his influence would reach, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was unlike anyone the Vorinians had ever encountered. The sun dipped lower behind the cliffs, casting long shadows that stretched across the ruins. Lyra felt the whispers in her mind again, but this time they were different. They were no longer just fear. They were caution, curiosity, and anticipation. He is here. He does not follow the rules. He will change everything. She looked at him, standing calm and resolute, and realized that the human was not just surviving in this world. He was shaping it, even in ways she could not yet comprehend. The whispers had told stories of fear, but now she understood that they were only the beginning. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Lyra knew that her world, the Vorinian world, would never be the same again. The human had arrived. And everything was about to change. The sector was quieter than usual. The ruins stretched endlessly, jagged towers and twisted metal casting long shadows under the dim light of Vorin's twin moons. Lyra Vensar followed the human, her senses alert, her mind racing. They had been moving for hours, and the further they went, the more she realized how little control the Vorinian authorities had over this place. Every hallway, every collapsed bridge, told a story of neglect and fear, a fear the human seemed to understand and manipulate without effort. "We need to reach the central control hub," he said, voice calm but firm. "From there I can see the full layout and understand the patterns. Once we do, we'll know how deep the disorder goes." Lyra nodded, though part of her worried. She had spent her life analyzing anomalies, studying threats, and enforcing protocol. This human was no threat in the traditional sense, but his presence, his confidence, and his unpredictability made her uneasy. He moved with an ease that defied the rules of the world, an instinctive understanding of the dangers she would have approached with careful caution. As they turned a corner, a sudden metallic clang echoed from above. Lyra's heart leapt into her throat. Shadows moved quickly across the broken walkways. It was a patrol, more numerous and more organized than the last. Lyra froze for a moment, but the human didn't hesitate. He glanced at her, a small, reassuring smile on his face. "Stay calm," he said. "Fear is their tool. If you don't give it to them, it loses its power." Lyra took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. She had always believed strength came from power, weapons, and force. But here she realized strength could come from something else entirely: composure, intelligence, and adaptability. The patrol descended, weapons ready, psychic sensors active. Their eyes widened as they saw the human. He didn't flinch, he didn't retreat. He simply observed, calculating. "You shouldn't be here," one of the patrol leaders barked, his forearms raised in a defensive stance. "Surrender now." The human shook his head slowly. "I am not your enemy. I am here to understand, to see what has been ignored for too long. You don't need to fear me. You need to think." The patrol hesitated. They had been trained to react to threats immediately, to suppress anything unpredictable. But here was a human standing calmly, unarmed, radiating a confidence that unsettled even the most disciplined soldiers. The whispers in Lyra's mind surged again. "They cannot control him. He changes everything." Before the patrol could respond, the human reached into his pack and pulled out a small device. It emitted a low pulse, soft enough to be almost unnoticed. The patrol froze, confusion flickering in their eyes. Lyra watched in amazement. The human wasn't using brute force. He was using understanding, observation, and ingenuity. "Adapt," he murmured under his breath, almost to himself. Then louder, "If you truly want order, see the truth. Don't fight it blindly." The patrol slowly lowered their weapons, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. The leader's psychic sensors flared, trying to pierce the human's mind, but he seemed untouchable. Lyra realized what she had suspected for some time. This human's mind was different. He wasn't stronger in a physical sense, but his presence, his thought, and his calm made him untouchable in a way the Vorinians could not comprehend. Once the patrol retreated, murmuring about reporting the incident, the human turned to Lyra. "They fear the unknown, not me. They fear the fact that someone can exist outside their rules and still succeed." Lyra swallowed, her chest tightening. She had seen fear before, but never like this, raw, instinctive, all-consuming. "And are you afraid?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "No, fear is only useful if it teaches you something. I've learned to use it, not be controlled by it." They continued deeper into the ruins, and Lyra noticed that every step the human took seemed to make the environment respond. Broken machinery hummed back to life at his touch. Doors that had been sealed for decades slid open effortlessly. He moved not just through the physical space, but through its history, reading patterns of neglect, understanding the intentions of those who built it, and using that knowledge to navigate safely. Finally, they reached the central control hub, a massive dome of metal and glass, its systems dark and silent. Lyra had been here before during inspections, but it had never felt alive. Now, with the human standing before it, the place seemed to hold its breath. "This is it," he said, moving toward the console at the center. "From here, I can see everything. I can understand the entire network, all the chaos left behind, and how to fix it." Lyra stepped closer, watching him work. His fingers moved over the controls with precision, pressing buttons, flipping switches, and running diagnostics. The lights flickered, machines hummed, and systems slowly came online. Lyra's eyes widened. Human hands, human understanding, human intelligence. She had underestimated the power of what a single human could achieve. As the systems came online, an alert flashed across the main console. Lyra frowned. "That's a warning. A rogue faction is moving through the sector. They've mobilized a force to eliminate whoever is causing disruption." The human glanced at the screen, his expression calm. "Good, we'll see how predictable they are." Lyra blinked. "Predictable, they're dangerous," he smiled faintly. "Exactly why they underestimate us." Within moments, alarms blared throughout the hub. Vorinian forces, rogue elements, were converging on their location. Lyra felt a familiar rush of panic, but the human did not. He moved with purpose, activating systems, opening pathways, and setting traps not to harm, but to delay. "They expect brute force," he said, "but I don't fight that way. I fight with understanding, anticipation, and adaptability." Lyra watched in awe as he manipulated the environment. Mechanical doors slammed shut at precise moments, corridors shifted, and automated defenses activated with perfect timing. The rogue forces entered, expecting a human to be weak, to panic, to be predictable. They found a labyrinth they could not navigate, a presence they could not read, and an opponent they could not intimidate. Hours passed. Lyra could see the toll on the rogue forces. Confusion, frustration, fear, they had never encountered this. The whispers in her mind returned, louder than ever. "He cannot be stopped. He adapts, he survives, he changes everything." Finally, the human paused, surveying the sector from the top of a raised platform. The rogue forces were retreating, their confidence shattered. He turned to Lyra, his expression unreadable but calm. "They learn," he said simply. Lyra nodded slowly, a mixture of awe and disbelief in her eyes. "I've never seen anything like this, not in my life." He glanced at her, eyes steady. "It's not just me, it's what humanity can do. We adapt, we think, we survive in ways that others cannot predict. And sometimes, that's enough to turn fear into opportunity." Lyra realized then that she had been trained to fear what she did not understand, to follow rules, and to believe in control. But here was a human who challenged all of that. He did not seek domination or revenge. He simply existed with purpose, intelligence, and courage, and in doing so, he reshaped the world around him. The rogue leader, a massive Vorinian with psychic enhancements, appeared briefly at the edge of the hub. His eyes blazed with fury. "This is not over, human," he shouted. "We will return with more forces. You will not escape." The human's eyes followed the retreating figure. "We'll see," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then, turning to Lyra, he added, "Prepare for what's next. They think they understand strategy, but they don't understand unpredictability. That's our advantage." Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. She had seen strength before, raw power and authority. But this was something else entirely. The human's power was in his mind, his adaptability, his ability to inspire change without force. And now she understood why the Whispers had carried fear throughout the Vorinian ranks. They spent the next hours securing the central hub, activating systems, and preparing for the inevitable return of the rogue forces. The human taught Lyra how to observe, how to anticipate, and how to use intelligence and ingenuity rather than brute strength. Every lesson was a revelation, challenging her understanding of what was possible. As the twin moons climbed higher, casting silver light across the hub, Lyra looked at him and realized something profound. This human was not just surviving in a foreign world, he was transforming it. He was showing the Vorinians that strength was not only in power, but in courage, creativity, and adaptability. "And you do this without fear?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Fear exists. I don't ignore it. I use it. I learn from it, and I act." Lyra felt a mix of admiration and humility. She had spent her life studying control, order, and discipline, but here was a force that defied all her lessons. And yet, it was not chaotic. It was purposeful, intelligent, and precise. The whispers in her mind shifted once more from fear to awe. "He stands before you. He is human. He will change everything." Lyra realized then that the human's presence was more than survival or ingenuity. It was inspiration. The Vorinian society had been ruled by fear, rigid rules, and hierarchy for centuries. And now, standing before her was someone who challenged all of it, not with violence, but with presence, intelligence, and courage. She could feel it in her chest, in the rhythm of her heartbeat. The human had not just survived the rogue forces. He had reshaped their perception, altered the landscape of fear, and shown a new path forward. Lyra knew that this was only the beginning. The rogue forces would return, stronger and more determined. But so would she, and so would the human. Together, they had proven that unpredictability, intelligence, and courage could triumph where power alone could not. And as the twin moons reflected off the central hub's metal surface, Lyra understood one final truth. The human did not merely stand before her. He stood for something far greater. He stood for humanity. And humanity was capable of far more than the Vorinians had ever imagined. The central hub glimmered under the twin moons, its machinery humming steadily. Lyra Vensar stood beside the human, her mind still spinning from everything they had experienced. The rogue Vorinian forces had retreated, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they returned. What she did not know was whether the Vorinian hierarchy itself would intervene, afraid of him, suspicious of him, and unwilling to admit that a human could influence the course of an entire society. The human surveyed the hub, calm as always, his eyes moving across the control panels and observation screens with quiet precision. "They are organized, disciplined, but predictable," he said. "They underestimate those who act outside their rules. That's our advantage." Lyra nodded, still trying to reconcile what she had learned. Humans were supposed to be fragile, unremarkable, small in comparison to the Vorinians. And yet here was one human, standing in the ruins of an alien world, reshaping the environment and forcing fear, confusion, and respect in equal measure. The whispers she had heard all her life had been right. Vorinians feared him, but now she understood the reason. It was not raw power he possessed. It was understanding, adaptation, and courage. "They will return," she said softly. "Stronger, with more forces, they won't forget this," he nodded once. "And neither will we. Fear is temporary, preparation and action endure." Lyra studied him, noting the calm in his posture, the subtle confidence that radiated from him. He had not only survived every encounter, they had faced danger, manipulation, and chaos, and yet he had grown stronger, not weaker. Every challenge had been an opportunity. Every fear he confronted became a lesson, and through it all he had not changed in arrogance or cruelty. He remained human. Hours passed, the night stretching endlessly as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The human moved through the hub with efficiency, activating systems, securing corridors, and establishing observation points. Lyra followed, learning from him, absorbing his methods. She realized that she had been trained to control everything through rules, fear, and discipline. He had shown her that strength could also come from flexibility, foresight, and understanding. Finally, a distant rumble echoed through the sector. Lyra's chest tightened. The rogue forces had returned, larger this time, moving with precise coordination. The human turned to her, expression calm as ever. "Stay here, observe, learn. This is not just about survival, it's about changing the way they see possibility." Lyra followed his gaze to the horizon. Dozens of Vorinians moved through the ruins, their psychic sensors flaring, weapons ready. They were confident in their numbers, certain that one human could not withstand them. But the human merely watched, calculating. As the rogue leader appeared at the edge of the hub, a massive figure radiating fury, the human spoke to Lyra. "Watch carefully. They are skilled, but they rely on rules. They think in patterns. I don't. That is why I succeed." The battle began, though it was not a battle in the traditional sense. The human did not charge or attack. He moved strategically, positioning himself and Lyra in ways that used the environment to their advantage. Doors slid open and closed, pathways shifted, machinery activated at precise intervals. The rogue forces rushed in, expecting a fight, expecting resistance, expecting fear, and found none. Confusion spread through their ranks. Commands were shouted, but the humans' calm disrupted their timing and focus. Every move the rogue forces made was anticipated, neutralized, or turned to their disadvantage, not by brute force, but by intelligence and adaptability. Lyra watched, stunned. He was turning the tide without striking a single blow. His presence alone altered the course of events, forcing his enemies to act against their instincts, to question their strategy, and to confront the unpredictability they had always feared. The rogue leader tried to strike directly, relying on strength and psychic power to overwhelm the human. But every attempt failed. The human moved with precise timing, creating openings in the terrain, forcing the leader into traps of his own making. It was not aggression, it was understanding, anticipation, and patience. Finally, the rogue leader faltered, his confidence shattered. The human stepped forward, calm and unarmed. "It's over," he said simply. "You cannot win by fear alone." The leader's psychic sensors flared, trying to dominate, intimidate, and control. But the human's mind was steady, unwavering, and precise. Lyra saw the realization dawn in the leader's eyes. He had underestimated the human. He had expected weakness, unpredictability, and chaos, and found mastery, clarity, and composure. One by one, the rogue forces retreated, confusion and fear overtaking determination. The human did not pursue them. He let them go, showing restraint and mercy, demonstrating that true strength was not in destruction, but in guidance and intelligence. Lyra felt a wave of awe wash over her. This human had done what Vorinians had considered impossible. He had reshaped a situation, controlled chaos, and inspired change, not through violence but through understanding and action. As the dust settled, Lyra turned to him. How did you do it? How could you?" He smiled faintly, looking out over the quieted sector. "I didn't do anything special. I adapted, I thought, I observed, and I acted when it mattered. That is what humans do best. We survive, we learn, and sometimes that is enough to change the world." Lyra studied him carefully. She had spent her life believing that power and fear were the only ways to command respect. Now she understood that intelligence, courage, and creativity could be just as powerful, perhaps more so. Over the following days, the Vorinian society began to shift. Word of the human's actions spread rapidly, carried by those who had witnessed him or heard of his exploits. Whispers of fear transformed into whispers of awe. "He is human. they said. He does not follow our rules, yet he thrives. He teaches us what we have forgotten. Lyra observed the changes with growing amazement. Officers who had once relied on strict hierarchy began to reconsider their methods. Leaders questioned their assumptions. Even ordinary citizens found courage in the example he had set. The human had done more than survive. He had inspired a society to rethink itself. At one point, Lyra asked him, "Do you plan to stay here to rule or to control them?" He shook his head. "No, I'm not here to dominate. I'm here to show possibility, to demonstrate that humans can survive, adapt, and inspire. The rest is up to them." Lyra realized then the true nature of his power. It was not in his physical strength, his tools, or his actions alone. It was in his presence, his mind, and his example. Humanity, he had shown, could reshape the world not by brute force but by intelligence, courage, and moral clarity. Weeks passed. The rogue leader had not returned, but his forces were reorganizing, wary of engaging again. Lyra had become his ally, a bridge between humans and Vorinians, helping to communicate his methods and perspective. She taught others to observe, to anticipate, and to act with intelligence rather than fear. The central hub, once a place of chaos and neglect, now thrummed with life. Machines ran smoothly, systems were restored, and corridors were secure. The human had transformed not just the hub, but the mindset of those who operated within it. One night, Lyra found herself standing beside him, watching the twin moons rise over the cliffs. "Do you ever tire?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "No, adaptation doesn't tire you. Understanding doesn't tire you. Fear tires you, doubt tires you." "I've learned not to be ruled by either," Lyra nodded. She felt a profound sense of respect, of awe. This human had come into their world quietly, without weapons or armies, and yet he had altered its course. He had reminded her, and all who witnessed him, of what it meant to be human, to think, to adapt, to survive, and to inspire. The whispers in the Vorinian cities had changed. No longer did they carry only fear. Now they carried recognition, anticipation, and hope. He is human. He stands before us. He reminds us of what is possible. Lyra realized that the story they would tell for generations would not be about battles or wars. It would be about presence, intelligence, courage, and the human spirit. And she understood that the human had done more than survive. He had shown what humanity could accomplish when it acted with clarity, purpose, and courage. As dawn approached, casting pale light over the restored hub, the human looked out over the city. Lyra asked, "What will you do next?" He smiled faintly. "I will continue. I will observe, adapt, and inspire, and perhaps one day humanity and Vorinians will understand each other better. Fear is temporary, understanding lasts." Lyra stood beside him, feeling a quiet strength she had never known before. Together they had faced chaos, fear, and opposition. And together they had emerged not just victorious but transformative. The human did not seek power, control, or dominance. He had only demonstrated what it meant to act with intelligence, courage, and adaptability. And in doing so, he had reminded the Vorinians, and Lyra herself, of something profound. That humanity, in all its seeming fragility, was capable of far more than anyone had imagined. The twin suns began to rise over the horizon, casting light across the cliffs and the city. Lyra looked at him, her mind clear for the first time in weeks. The whispers had faded, replaced by understanding and awe. The human had come. He had stood before them. And in his presence, the Vorinians, and she, had learned what it truly meant to be alive, adaptable, and fearless.